No, we continue our series on learning about anarchy. And today we're jumping into chapter 5, talking about crime. With this first section, who will protect us without police? Very much looking forward to it. Last time, if you all recall, we talked about the environment in chapter 4, and that anarchy is kind of like the only chance we have to really solve climate change, because a hierarchy doesn't really care that much for these long-term sustainable things. It's more about short-term gains, so they don't really optimize for real change on that level. At least that's what it seems. So shout out to the Radical Discussion Group, reading group. They began reading this book, and we had a great discussion earlier this week. So that was really fantastic. Um, and one of my other reading groups from St. Andrew, they're just starting to read this book. So everybody's reading this book, um, and I'm really enjoying the conversations being had. But for those that's with me today, let's jump into it. Prison is the institution that most concretely symbolizes domination. Oof. Again, I love how Peter just swings out the gate with this stuff. Absolutely beautiful. Anarchists wish to create a society that can protect itself and resolve internal problems without police, judges, or prisons. A society that does not view its problems in terms of good and evil, permitted and prohibited, law abiders and criminals. This is such a powerful start right here, right? Because this is a huge reason and kind of justification for why we treat people the way we do in our current system, current justice system, right? So quote unquote justice is that we say, oh, they're bad people, right? They're criminals, but the vast majority of these criminals are in there for non-violent crimes, right? For either all sorts of traffic citations or drugs or all this other stuff that has nothing to do with anybody else but themselves, and that they happen to trip a line over a law that they didn't agree to even abide to in the first place. They just kind of are forced to abide by the laws that somebody else set up for you, you know and is these sorts of things that you really have to consider. You really have to look at it and be like, does this really make sense? Really? Is it not better for us to volunteer to, abide by certain rules and regulations that we, as each individual person, kind of agrees with, on a regular basis? Like, that's usually a better case. And then the fact that they have like these permitted and prohibited, um, a lot of these laws are not on a case by case basis. Is based on precedents and things like that. So I'm sure he'll get into it. But yeah, I really like how he started this. Who will protect us without police? Oh yes, the police, the heroes of our nation. In our society, police benefit from a tremendous amount of hype. Yes, overhype, right? Whether it's bias and fear mongering media coverage of crime or the flood of movies and television shows featuring cops as heroes and protectors. Yet many people's experiences with police contrast starkly with this heavy handed propaganda. Ain't that the truth? Especially those of us look a little different in a hierarchical society. And yes, I say that as a person who speaks like this, who's a small individual, 120 pounds, butt naked, soaking wet. I'm not a threatening individual, by the standard ideas, but it doesn't matter. I still look like one, and I've had my own experiences, so it really doesn't matter, right? Um, in a hierarchical society, whom do police protect? Who has more to fear from crime? And who has more to fear from police? In some communities, the police are like an occupying force. Oh my gosh, man, just bars. Police and crime form the interlocking jaws of a trap that prevents people from escaping oppressive situations or rescuing their communities from violence, poverty, and fragmentation. This is some great stuff right here. Historically, police did not develop out of a social necessity. Oh my gosh, let's talk about it. Let's see if he gets into it. To protect people from rising crime. In the United States, modern police forces arose at a time when crime was already diminishing. Rather the Rather, the institution of police emerged as a means to give ruling class greater control over the population and expand the state's monopoly on the resolution of social conflict. Ooh. This was not a response to crime or an attempt to solve it. On the contrary, it coincided with the creation of new forms of crime. At the same time, police forces were being expanded and modernized. The ruling class began to criminalize predominantly lower class behaviors that had previously been acceptable, such as vagrancy, gambling, and public drunkenness. Those in authority define criminal activity according to their own needs, then present their definitions as neutral and timeless. Uh, as like a universal, right? Universal morals and stuff. For example, many more people may be killed by pollution and work related accidents than by drugs, but drug dealers are branded a threat to society, not factory owners. And even when factory owners break the law in a way that kills people, they are not sent to prison. There are so many stories with this. So, first of all, I'm not sure if he's going to get more into it, but look it up. Especially in America, specifically in America, a lot of the police force was born almost directly from slavery, from people who, from the slave masters and the really the entire um, white middle class who didn't own slaves but wanted to be at that level. Because remember, the only people who owned slaves were rich people, usually, which is roughly, it was roughly what, 13% of white people at the time owned slaves. Right? However, the vast majority of other white people who didn't own slaves were like cuddling up to the master, like, "Oh, we're gonna catch them niggas, bro. We're gonna catch them and we're gonna bring them back." Right? This was a real thing they did. Go read the book Black Reconstruction, or just learn about the Reconstruction era. Um, that entire time from slavery on up to the Revolutionary Wars, Jim Crow, not revolutionary, goodness, war to Jim Crow, that entire time, and even afterwards, right? Most of the white, middle class and lower class were trying to deem themselves above, right? Because they weren't rich. So they looked at the black people and they're like, oh, we're above them, right? And so they were the main enforcer for slavery. Whenever a slave tried to escape, these were the folks that went and tried to bring him back, and that was where a lot of the police institutions were born from. You may have heard the story about how shares and like the little star icon was directly correlated, not just correlated, was created by these slave catchers. So yeah, the history of the police is terrible. And furthermore, what he's saying here, right, for the institutions, a lot of the police force was privatized by the first merchants and the factory owners, right? Because they had all this property, they had all these factories, and they wanted to protect their product, their wares and stuff like that. And they were worried about these poor people coming in and taking their stuff. Really just, trying to live life because they were being barely being paid pennies. And even at the time then that was still not really enough to live a life. But this is why that you had the term white slavery, right? The term wage slavery actually came from the first factories in America, or really around the world, in Europe as well. But the first factories, there were such bad conditions and so, you know, so just terrible, right? And people were being forced to work at these places for very little money, that they were deemed, the white slavery. And so that's why you saw that division between the abolitionists. Less and less abolitionists began to care about black slavery, and more cared about quote unquote white slavery. So yeah, all of that, the police institutions were further, created or instituted during that time. So yeah, it's really like oh, another one here, like this word vagrancy. Oh my gosh! Again, read the book Black Reconstruction. Um, they talk about how this word was specifically used for black people who, during the Jim Crow or during the that Reconstruction era, after the Civil War, when the black folks were supposed to be free, um, but because they were just coming from slavery, they didn't have any skills, right? They didn't have ability to read, write, no history of employment, obviously. And so what they would do is create these vagrancy laws, which says, oh, if you don't have a job, you go into jail, all right? Right? And if since or you get a fine. And if you can't pay for your fine, then you are basically going to pay it off by working for this person, basically slaves. So they created this law specifically to get people back to slavery, right? Um, and it was efficient because most people didn't have jobs, and they didn't have job history and all this other stuff. So it was just the entire system was built against us, right? um, a lot of this, sometimes this was applied to poor white folks as well. Don't get me wrong. Um, like there were some people they called the like the origins of the hillbillies and things like that. They were deemed similarly bad, but not as bad, right? Because obviously, like people love to institute a hierarchy of value and things like that. So yeah, this whole bomb.com. Today, over two-thirds of prisoners in the U.S. are locked up for nonviolent offenses, right? It is no surprise that the majority of prisoners are poor people and people of color. Given the criminalization of drugs and immigration, the disproportionately harsh penalties for the drugs typically used by poor people, and the greater chance people of color have of being convicted or sentenced more harshly for the same crimes. Likewise, the intense presence of militarized police in ghettos and poor neighborhoods is connected to the fact that crime stays high in those neighborhoods while rates of incarceration increase. The police and prisons are systems of control that preserve social inequalities, spread fear and resentment, exclude and alienate whole communities, and exercise extreme violence against the most oppressed sectors of society. They literally create these conditions for which a lot of this crime is created. Like, how does this make sense right here, right? You have higher rates of incarceration, but even higher rates of crime. So like if you're taking crime off the streets, right? If you're taking the criminals off the streets, why is there still more crime, right? It's not it's just common math, right? The common cause there is that these police forces are creating the circumstances for crime to arise. Everything from um um outlawing like just regular stuff, like again vagrancy, just being unemployed is a crime, or it was a crime, um, to these nonviolent crimes and getting offenses for this and that, loitering and all this other stuff. So time and time again, this is what we mean by institutional racism, right? It's like literally the systematic racism, right? The system is built for this stuff. Those who can organize their own lives within their communities are better equipped to protect themselves. Some societies and communities have won autonomy from the state, organize volunteer patrols to help people in need and discourage aggressions. Yeah. Unlike the police, these groups generally do not have coercive authority or a closed bureaucratic structure, and are more likely to be made up of volunteers from within a neighborhood. They focus on protecting people rather than property or privilege, and in the absence of a legal code, they respond to people's needs rather than inflexible protocol. Other societies organize against social harm without setting up specific institutions. Instead, they utilize diffuse sanctions. Responses and attitudes spread throughout the society and propagated in the culture to promote a safe environment. Awesome. I love that. So this is a long section, I think. Yeah, goodness. And I got places to be, so I might have to end it soon. I gave it a few more minutes, these last couple paragraphs until that point, I think. Anarchists take an entirely different view of the problems that authoritarian societies place within the framework of crime and punishment. A crime is a violation of a written law, and laws are imposed by elite bodies. In a final instance, the question is not whether someone is hurting others, but whether she is disobeying the orders of the elite. Exactly. As a response to crime, punishment creates hierarchies of morality and power between the criminal and the dispensers of justice. Yep. It denies the criminal the resources he may need to reintegrate into the community and to stop hurting others, right? Thus, the very low, what's it called? Recidivism? Yeah. Recidivism rates. In an empowered society, people do not need written laws. They have the power to determine whether someone is preventing them from fulfilling their needs, and can call on their peers for help resolving conflicts. In this view, the problem is not crime, but social harm. Yeah. Actions such as assault, and drunk driving that actually hurt other people. This paradigm does away with the category of victimless crime and reveals the absurdity of protecting the property rights of privileged people over the survival needs of others. Exactly. The outrage is tip the out yeah, the outrage is typical of capitalist justice, such as arresting the hungry for stealing from the wealthy would not be possible in a needs-based paradigm. Just reflect on that. Well said, Mr. Gelderloo. During the February 1919 general strike in Seattle, workers took over the city. Commercially, Seattle was shut down, but the workers did not. Okay, yeah, sorry. But the workers did not allow it to fall into disarray. On the contrary, they kept all vital services running, but organized by the workers without the management of the bosses. The workers were the ones running the city every other day of the year anyway, and during the strike, they proved that they knew how to conduct their work without managerial interference. They coordinate citywide organization through the General Strike Committee, made up of rank and file workers from every local union. The structure was similar to, and perhaps inspired by, the Paris Commune. Union locals and specific groups of workers retained autonomy over their jobs without management or interference from the committee or any other body. Workers were free to take initiative at the local level. Milk wagon drivers, for example, set up a neighborhood milk distribution system the bosses, restricted by profit motives, would never have allowed. The striking workers collected the garbage, set up public cafeterias, distributed free food, and maintained fire department services. They also provided protection against antisocial behavior, robberies, assaults, murders, rapes. The crimes were the crimes wave authoritarians always forecast. I'm sorry, the crime wave authoritarians always forecast. Yeah. Like a lot of this stuff is more easily handled when you actually have a community, right? Where people actually care about each other and are looking out for each other. A lot of these crimes happen because people aren't looking out for each other, and people don't know who's who, like don't recognize each other and things like that. Aren't don't have a relationship, I should say, and that plays a huge aspect into it. A city guard comprised of unarmed military veterans walked the streets to keep watch and respond to calls for help, though they were authorized to use warnings and persuasion only. Aided by the feelings of solidarity that created a stronger social fabric during the strike, the volunteer guard were able to maintain a peaceful environment, accomplishing what the state itself could not. Think about that, man. It's like there's no police in these folks, and they became more peaceful than when there was. Just goodness. The context of solidarity, free food, and empowerment of the common person played a role in drying up crime at its source. Marginalized people gained opportunities for community involvement, decision making, and social inclusion that were denied to them by the capitalist regime. The absence of the police, whose presence emphasizes class tensions and creates a hostile environment, may have actually decreased lower class crime. Even the authorities remarked on how organized the city was. Ma- Major General John F. Morrison, stationed in Seattle, claimed that he had never seen a city so quiet and so orderly. The strike was ultimately shut down by the invasion of thousands of troops and police deputies, coupled with pressure from the union leadership. Just think about this, right? A city that their own, like the opponent general or whatever, explained like it was peaceful, like it's a beautiful, like it's a quiet city now, it's orderly, right? And what was the response? Storm the city. Go, like why? What purpose? There was literally less crime there than ever before, than this general has ever seen in any other city. So why in the world would you stop it, right? So this is just proof that these authoritarians just don't make any sense, and they just want authority. They don't actually care about safety and the things that will claim the authorities are there for. And New Mexico City ends 2006 during the 5 months. Well, I might stop there actually. This is another kind of idea. I think that goes with this. So I might actually, yeah, I'll stop here because I do have to go. Got a lot to do. Um, but it's just great stuff, man. Peter Gretaloo is so fantastic. A lot of great insights. So let me know what you got from this small little section here. We'll continue most likely next week, but I'll try to do it a little bit earlier. I don't know. We'll see. Um, and maybe these sort of videos are more accessible to people. But either way, thank you for watching as always, and have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.